The forest was never silent. It breathed in ways most men had forgotten to hear through the crackle of bark beneath unseen waves. The soft drag of claws against frozen soil, the sudden hush of birds that knew when not to sing. To walk these woods was to step into the lungs of the ancient. Something that remembered he moved between trees, not sound. Muscles coiled beneath fur that shimmered in moonlight like oil spilled on snow. The air clung to him, cold and metallic, thick with the scent of pine and blood. His heart beat not with but with rhythm cadence. Older than names, older than language, he was the rhythm, he was the alpha, and nothing hunted him until now. The first sign was small, a silence natural, but imposed an absence in the underbrush. A trail that twisted in ways no one. He had known the feeling once, long ago. Oh, when he was still a man, when dread crept in like water, into boots, slow and undeniable. Now, it surged like a scream rising in his chest. Just a fragment, carved not into bark, to the air he could smell it. Copper and sage and bone, his hackles lifted. His snarl tasted sour. He turned back, not to run. He did not run, but to reposition. He knew when the ground beneath him was no longer his. But the woods were wrong now, angled, tilted. Trees repeated in patterns that felt rehearsed. Trails looped where they should have branched. Something had folded the land into itself. He was being circled. Then came the sound, not a roar, not a howl, not even a scream. A bell, soft and ringing like it had been struck underwater. It hung in the air too long. It rang through his ribs, not heard, but felt. A warning, or worse, a signal. He moved faster now, no more subtlety. The illusion was broken, and the hunt was real. Branches shattered around him. Snow burst like breath. Every step carried the worries of domination. But even the apex can bleed. Unnashed in the dark, this one red, not just carved, but burning. Floating above the ground, like a brand held by the dead, his left leg seized. For a moment, his body did not belong to him. He skidded, stumbled, crashed into the bark of an old cedar that creaked like it might pity him. He rose, panting. He smelled blood, his own, much, not enough to weaken him. But it was the principle of the thing that made him bleed, that had not happened in years, maybe longer. The clouds shifted. The moon stared down, cold and pathetic, a full disk, bright and watchful. His reflection, a pool of melted snow near his paws, and for a heartbeat he didn't recognize the thing looking back. Not just wolf, not just man, a question, a challenge. He turned again this time, not from fear, but fury, and let out a low guttural snarl. It had been weeks, maybe longer, since the last true run. The kind that stretches muscle and mind into one seamless being, where instinct writes the map and the body forgets what it means to be bound by skin. He had tried to stay hidden, slipping between forgotten roads and collapsed barns, slinking through deer trails and storm drains, nesting in shadows no man would willingly enter. He needed time to think, to observe, to understand why the self seemed to pulse with ancient spite. A burned church outside of Wren's Hollow became his den. Long stained glass teeth cracked and dull. Charred beams cradled snow and silence in equal measure. Here he sat human again, if you could call it that. Nails, two long eyes that twitched at movement no one else could see. Voice rusted by disuse. He hadn't spoken aloud in months. Language felt theatrical, unnecessary. Survival didn't need grammar. Past clung to him in flashes. There had been a time brief and fragile where the nights were not hunts, but songs. Whereas packs circled not with fangs, but with loyalty, they'd marked the lands together, drawn glyphs in the soil that meant peace. Warning kin, it had kept them safe, kept the world at bay, till something answered those glyphs with silence. Not ignorance no, were sack knowledge. Then came the disappearances. First a scout, Then the howl never returned. Then the blackened mark outside the den, a smear of ash that reeked of burned fur and betrayal. And then the betrayal itself, the one he called Mother, had whispered to outsiders, given them maps, names, tethers, and the word. Done it for money or vengeance, he had done it for knowledge, to understand the beast, as if it were separate from the man. Now, the alpha sat alone in a shell of wood and ash, brushing the warped wooden floor where names of long-dead prayers once echoed. He knew this place, not the building, but the rhythm, the kind of hollow men built when they were what moved outside their fires. Etched beneath the symbol, faint but familiar, a crescent twisted against itself, the broken glyph, sigil of worship, a warning he should have moved. Then but exhaustion sank like rot into his limbs. And there was something strange in the air that night, metallic, almost sentient. It tugged at the edges of his consciousness, like fingers dragging down a curtain. Woke to the smell of wax and ozone. Someone had lit a circle of candles. Around the altar, the glyph was glowing, and outside, far beyond the broken stained glass grin, the trees stood straighter than before. Their branches hung like waiting arms. He moved fast, low, silent, and even still. He heard it again, not breathing, but the sound of decision, not his, theirs. The new adversaries did not smell like men. They wore skin like borrowed coats, held together with glyphs and greed. They did not fear the night they summoned. He crossed 2 rivers by dawn, dragging. The hunger arrived before the sunrise, not the kind that gnaws at the belly, but the kind that whispers behind the teeth insistent. Wrong. It wasn't his cycle. The moon wasn't right. No pull. No fever behind the eyes. Something inside him itched for release. He crouched near a frozen stream, staring down at his reflection, waiting for it to betray him. It did, not with movement, but with absence, no steam from his breath. No twitch in the fur at his jawline, just a stillness too perfect to be natural. The image held its pose even when he turned his head. He backed away slowly. The water remained still, reflecting nothing at all. Then came the scent burned pine. Tanned leather, blood but not spilled, stored. Whoever hunted him now came from a tradition older than bullets, older than silver. Their tools weren't made, they were inherited. He ducked low, pulse hammering behind his ears. Trees not with eyes, but with instinct. And yet still, nothing. Not a sound, not a branch out of place. Only that hunger gnawing at his stomach, that whisper of fur beneath skin. The transformation threatening to time, he'd trained his body to obey the moon, to honor the rules, not just for safety but for survival. The wild could be controlled. The beast could be managed, but now his own blood betrayed him. His fingers twitched. At the base, a ripple moved up his spine, sharp and like a shiver laced with static. Not full transformation, just pieces, like the body was testing its own cage. That's when the voices began. Not out loud, not yet. Whispers between his thoughts. He still waits beneath the hollow tree. A phrase not his. He did, but the words struck something in him like a claw dragged across memory. He stumbled forward, dizzy now. The world spun to a different rhythm. Trees loomed too close together. Sky pulsed red for a breath and returned to gray. Beneath his scars burned cold. He needed ground, needed control, but control was leaving him like blood from a wound. He collapsed near a stone ridge and dug into the frozen dirt. Not to hide, to anchor, hands buried, fingers twitching in filth. He wasn't alone. A figure moved across the ridge above him, not walking, gliding. Covered in a cloak woven from some texture that absorbed the light. No face visible, no footsteps. Heard just the gentle drag of something sharp scraping across stone as it passed. He didn't move, not because of fear, but because of weight, his limbs heavy, his skin not his own. A new hunger surged. It wasn't about feeding. It was about escaping. He howled, loud, not proud, but choked and fractured. The sound of an alpha breaking without witness, the figure turned and vanished. The silence returned, but it was thinner now, the edges like old paint. He peeled himself from the dirt, mouth filled with the taste of rust and ash. One of his eyes saw clear, the other, not so much. It pulsed with red, then black, then red again. Something had begun. And he wasn't the one in it. He ran, not out of panic, but calculation. The glyphs were triggering a transformation loop, false signals, They were trying to force it out of sync. If he lost control here, he'd die. Followed the old riverbed one. Only the cryptid blood existed. A path lined with bones so ancient, they whispered, the burn along his shoulder had gone from cold to fire. Every breath dragged heat through his throat. The scent of his own blood tainted everything bitter iron, laced with something older. Fouler, not sickness, not poison, glyph ash, he had seen. It used once, long ago, during a pack-forging rite between packs in the dead swamps near Kessler Hollow. A dust made from burned sigils. Pressed into the skin of the willing to seal allegiance or wound the faithless. When laced into flesh unwilling, it did not mark. It corrupted. The path beneath him began to twist again. Trees changed shape with each blink, contorting, curling inward like skeletal hands. He passed an old birch and doubled back 3 birches. Identical, time-looped, space-warped. The glyph in his blood was triggering an old trap, one designed not to kill a werewolf, but to separate. His bones cracked, not in the usual way. Not in the way that preluded the familiar rhythm of transformation. No, this was jagged, uncommanded. Fingers bent at wrong angles, hair rippled in half patterns, his jaw jolted sideways. Vision doubled, then tripled, then steadied into 2 distinct points of view for a full 2 seconds before snapping back like a broken neck realigning. He dropped to his knees, panting, growling, bleeding from that hadn't even ruptured. I fit out of the tree line, not cloaked, not veiled, just they're human, almost a woman barefoot. Covered in black furs, too clean for wilderness, with eyes like polished moonstone, reflection, no warmth. She didn't speak at first, just watched as he writhed, snarling through a half-shift he couldn't. When her voice came, it didn't echo. It carved. You were never supposed to break the pact. He tried to stand. Failed. One leg was still human, the other pawed. Cracked at the shin, his mouth, but language died in his throat. She stepped forward and reached into her cloak, pulled something out, a bone, long, hollow, etched. She dropped it between them like a challenge. The glyph carved into it pulsed, the broken sigil. That's when it all came back. The pact, the betrayal, the lie, the hunters were never outsiders. They were descendants of the same bloodline, the same cursed tree. There had been a time when werewolves weren't hunted by man, by their own kin, enforcers, ritualists, cleaners, and she was one. Of them, he knew her. Her name had been buried in ash and time, but once, in another form, her sister. She had marked him not to kill, but to cleanse. I didn't betray you, he rasped, voice fractured, teeth shifting even as he spoke. You did. She only smiled. You were the first to howl after the pact fractured that made you the key. The mark you back when it began again.
Another crack.
His ribs realigned. His claws fully emerged now. The transformation no longer triggered. Found a new engine. Her voice, the glyph in his blood, synced with. Her presence, he was no longer shifting because of instinct. He was shifting because of command. He charged, she vanished, reappeared 10 feet behind him. Untouched, unbothered. She wasn't prey. She wasn't even predator. She was ritual, he screamed. Last part of him that was Manawolf ripped at the seams. The moon rose red, not the kind painted by dust or atmosphere, but one marked by intent. It bled over the treetops, like a divine, soaking every shadow in copper light. Beneath it, The forest breathed in sync with something ancient. Something awakened. He crawled through the roots of the elder pine, spine convulsing, muscles tearing and re-knitting like frantic sewing. The transformation was no longer a cycle. It was a commandment. Man, half-wolf. All rebellion was breaking under the weight of fulfillment. The glyph on his shoulder throbbed with heat. Lines once scarred now glowed, pulsing with bloodlight. The bone sigil, the one she dropped, had not vanished. It had burrowed, threading itself through him, latching onto nerves like a parasite desperate to rewrite him from the inside out. Every cost, each inhale iron, and something older than rot tried to think, tried to remember the pact in its original form only. The bound may turn beneath the second skin. The red moon calls not to the cursed, out to the second skin. That was the myth mechanic. Transformation lit was ancestral. The body was a vessel, yes, but the curse. The curse was chosen, and they had chosen him. He emerged from the brush just as the clearing opened, and there it was, the bone fire, massive, circular. Built from rib cages and antlers, flames danced in shades. No normal fire dared blues that shifted. Two green, flickering into violet, around it stood 6 figures, cloaked, glyphs seared foreheads like brands from forgotten alphabets. He knew them, or rather he knew of them. The Sigil 6, the old enforcers, the ones sent to eliminate. Rogue bloodlines, burnout, unstable mutations, silence those who howled too loud. The one in the center stepped forward. Not the woman from before, but the man she once called brother. He had not eyes silver, skin pale, voice like cracked glass. You were supposed to be. Your howl ended the first pact. This is the consequence. The werewolf inside its fangs. No, he growled. This is the reckoning? He surged forward. The glyph again, resisting him, but this time let it. Instead of fighting the pull, he invited it, bent it, let the second skin rise not as a curse, but as defiance. The transformation ripped through. Him complete this time. Fur exploded from flesh. Eyes went white. Snapped, and his roar shook the bone fire, sent embers spiraling like frantic. He did not speak again. The creature did. It leaped. The 6 moved in unison, ritual, calculated, synchronized by something deeper than thought. Each held a weapon etched with red ink, forged not from metal but from forgotten vows. They sliced the air in patterns. Glyphs erupted mid-air, flaring, like sigils drawn in lightning, but he was faster, smarter, angrier. One fell before the first glyph lit, throat torn. Another tried to bind him, loop it shattered in his jaws. Third attempted a chant, never finished, but for every strike he landed, the glyph in his shoulder screamed. It fought him with every kill, made him relive each wound twice, once in body, once in memory. Then came the voice, not hers, his own. Every howl is a name forgotten. It cracked through his head like thunder through bone. He paused, breathless, trembling, blood his, and there spattered across his claws. He realized what they were trying to do. This wasn't a hunt. It was a ritual reset. They were trying to erase his line, end the bloodline entirely. There was no victory howl, no triumphant roar into the night sky, no echo through the treetops to signal dominance. Only a quiet, panting breath and the soft crumble of ash beneath shifting paws. He stood alone in the remains of the clearing. The bone fire was no more than a smoldering memory now. A heap of scorched bone and charred glyphs, seeping a low, sour. The 6 were gone. Nothing left of them but cracked symbols and shadows burned into the soil. Even the red moon, once pulsing with profit, rolled to a rusted yellow ashamed. To watch the aftermath, the wind didn't move, the trees didn't creak. Everything waited, but nothing came. He collapsed to his knees. What knees remained? The transformation had receded, partially enough to breathe without growling. Enough to feel pain in a way more man than monster. That was the problem. The pain didn't fade when the fangs did. His hand shook as he dug into the dirt, not for escape, not evil, but for memory, somewhere under here, beneath the crust of blood and spell, was the part of himself that remembered what it meant to run with others. It remembered names, but the glyph had done its work. Not their faces, not their howls. It's just shadows where the memories should be. The sigil etched his shoulder still pulsed faintly. No longer a threat, but a scar, a reminder, a signature. He had broken the ritual, but not the curse. The pact was undone, erased. Its echoes would follow him, twisted, carried on his blood like a brand the body couldn't reject. The woman, the enforcer, the sister. Whatever name she once had vanished with the fire. Never saw her fall, never heard her scream. That made her dangerous still, or immortal, but it was what she left behind that mattered. Beneath a broken piece of the ritual circle, buried in soot and splintered bone, lay a talisman, small, simple. From the same bone that marked the pact, but different, it bore his glyph. Not the Quran, not the one they forced onto him, his original, the one he drew himself ago, in blood. The cave wall gathering, before betrayal, before lineage, mattered more than loyalty. He held it to his chest. It burned cold. A final gift. Or a final warning? He didn't know, and he didn't care. He limped through the woods as dawn approached, eyes narrowed, breath shallow. The world felt changed, but maybe it had always been this broken, and he was just too caught up in dominance to notice he didn't shift back. Not fully. The human no longer fit right. It's too soft, too slow, too easy to forget. He needed the fangs now, the claws, the scent. Not for war, for memory. Each scar told a story. Each broken bone held. You can still hear it, can't you? That sound in the back of your skull, half growl, half breath. It's not coming from your speakers, not from the woods outside. It's not even sound in the way we understand it. It's memory, not yours. His. When he left the clearing, when he crossed the river with the black stones and vanished into the places the sun forgets to reach, didn't vanish entirely. Part of him stayed behind in the ash, in the bone, and smeared across a shattered sigil. That's what they never tell you about the cursed. They don't just disappear, they echo, and those echoes, they look for places to land. Stories like this, they don't just entertain, they mark that twitch in your skin just now. The way your breath caught when the glyph was carved? That wasn't a flinch, it was a recognition. You knew, even if you didn't understand it at the time. Some part of you did. You recognized the fear of being hunted. Not the fear of death, but the fear of being understood by the thing chasing you. Having no secrets left when back is your own, mirrored in fangs and hunger. He thought he was the predator, and then he thought he was the prey. But in the end, he became something else entirely, a witness. And that's what you are now, too. Because the story didn't end in that clearing, the glyphs are still out there. The Sigil 6. They were only one cell. There are more, and they're listening. They track through more than footprints. They move through stories, through signals, through moments where your heartbeat sinks too closely to the ones echoing. In the trees, you heard the howl. Guide you what you do next. That's your choice. You could pretend this tale, a fable, a nightmare spun for views and tensions, or you could accept that some legends survive not because they're false, but because they're protected. And tonight, one just found you. If your story ends in fur and moonlight, send it to us before you change. And for those who hunger for more, step deeper into the shadows at Werewolf Horror. Playlist linked in the description below.